today we are going to talk about Jane's condition. Jane has been staying home for months now due to the pandemic. These past couple of days, she has started to experience fever, night sweats, persistent fatigue, and shortness of breath. Jane was extremely anxious, carrying the thought that she might have coronavirus. Out of angst, she raised and extended her hand to massage her neck and accidentally felt a lump around it. The following day, Jane decided to visit her doctor and found out that the symptoms are likely to portray a lymphoma. The doctor recommended her for MRI, and the results affirmed a cancer of the lymphatic system. What is the lymphatic system? Lymphatic system is often the unrecognized organ system of the human body. It carries the excess interstitial fluid from tissues back to cardiovascular circulation, which provides locations for immune cells to monitor the body. Take note that without this particular system, our cardiovascular system would not function and our immune system would probably be impaired. The lymphatic system consists of the two semi-independent parts, which are the lymphatic vessels functions to transport fluids or lymph that have escaped from the blood back to the cardiovascular system. The lymph flows into the larger lymphatics to the blood vascular system through the right lymphatic duct and the left thoracic duct. The lymphatic system is a low-pressure, pumpless system which transports fluids through the muscular and respiratory pumps via rhythmic contractions of the smooth muscle in the walls of the larger lymphatics. Through returning these fluids via lymphatics,
if it is not returned, fluid accumulate in the tissues and will probably result in swelling on the hands, arms, feet, ankle, and the legs. Lungs will be filled with fluid and low blood volume and pressure occurs, which could be fatal to our health. The lymphoid tissues and organs houses the phagocytic cells and lymphocytes, which plays essential roles in body defense and resistance to disease.
The lymph nodes and within it, the macrophages, helps eradicate foreign substances such as infections and harmful bacteria in the fluid before it is returned. It also produces lymphocytes that functions in the immune response. Phagocytic macrophages are located in the central medulla of the lymph node. The lymph enters through the afferent lymphatic vessels, which flows through a number of spaces which meander through the lymph node and exits from the hilum via afferent lymphatic vessels. The flow of the lymph through the node is slow, which allows lymphocytes and macrophages to monitor or inspect foreign materials and do their protective job. The other lymphoid organs include the spleen, thymus, tonsils, Peyer's patches, and adenoids, which also. Speaking of which, the human body is exposed to foreign substances every day, but with the help of our immune system, it protects it from harmful pathogens.
There are two types of defense mechanisms: the innate and adaptive defense mechanisms.
The innate defense system responds immediately to protect the body from all foreign substances, whatever they are, while the adaptive defense system fights antigens that get past the innate defenses. Both work hand in hand to protect the body and renders shield even with our cells that have turned against us. An important feature of an adaptive response is that it remembers the pathogens it has fought. Moving on, natural killer cells are lymphocytes which act non-specifically to burst virus-infected and malignant cells. Whenever a person is infected, exposed in irritating chemicals and intense heat, inflammatory response occurs. The damaged cell triggers the release of inflammatory chemicals such as histamine and kinins. The inflammatory response prevents the spread of damaging agents to nearby tissues. The process begins when neutrophils enter the blood. When the chemical signal is strongest, they flatten and squeeze through the capillary walls, which then gathers at the site of the injury and removes the foreign materials. There are instances that in a severely infected area, the battle takes a considerable toll on both sides, which can form a creamy, yellow pus in the wound. Although pathogens that had successfully made it through
mechanical barriers are confronted by phagocytes, macrophages, and neutrophils, which engulf pathogens that penetrate epithelial barriers by phagocytosis.
A variety of antimicrobial proteins enhance the innate defenses either by attacking microorganisms directly or by hindering their ability to reproduce. The most important of these are complement and interferon. The term complement refers to a group of at least 20 plasma proteins that circulate in the blood in an inactive state, much like inactive clotting proteins. It is a non-specific defensive mechanism that complements or enhances the effectiveness of both innate and adaptive defenses. These proteins must be activated in a particular sequence called a cascade, which ensures that complement is not accidentally activated. The interferon molecules diffuse to nearby cells and bind to their membrane receptors. This binding stimulates the synthesis of proteins that interfere with the ability of viruses to multiply within these still healthy cells, reducing the spread of the virus. Interferons do not assist with fighting bacterial or fungal infections. Another innate defense is fever. Fever, or abnormally high body temperature, is a systemic response to invading microorganisms. Although high fevers are dangerous because excess heat, fever seems to benefit the body. Bacteria require large amounts of iron and zinc to multiply, but during a fever, the liver and spleen gather up these nutrients, making them less available. Fever, in general, speeds up repair processes. Now let's move forward to the adaptive body defenses. The immune response to a threat involves tremendously increased internal non-specific defenses and also provides protection that is carefully targeted against specific antigens. Referred to as the body's third line of defense, the adaptive or specific defense mechanism is a functional system that recognizes foreign molecules called antigens and acts to inactivate or destroy them. Normally, it protects us from a wide variety of pathogens as well as from abnormal body cells. When it fails, malfunctions, or is disabled, some of the most devastating diseases such as cancer, rheumatoid, arthritis, and AIDS may result. Two adaptive defense systems were recognized. They are the humoral immunity and cellular immunity. Humoral immunity, also called antibody-mediated immunity, is provided by antibodies present in the body's humors or fluid. When lymphocytes themselves defend the body, the immunity is called cellular immunity or cell-mediated immunity because the protective factor is living cells. When lymphocytes themselves defend the body, the immunity is called cellular immunity or cell-mediated immunity because the protective factor is living cells. Now we'll talk about antigens. An antigen is any substance capable of provoking an immune response. Antigens are large, complex molecules recognized as foreign by the body. Foreign proteins are the strongest antigens. Complete antigens provoke an immune response and bind with products of that response. Incomplete antigens or haptens are small molecules that are unable to cause an immune response by themselves, but do so when they bind to body proteins and the complex is recognized as foreign. At this moment, let's hop on to the cells of adaptive defense system. There are two main cell populations, the lymphocytes and antigen-presenting cells. Lymphocytes arise from hemocytoblasts of bone marrow. It exists in the two major flavors. Lymphocytes arise from hemocytoblasts of bone marrow. It exists in two other major flavors: the B lymphocytes or B cells and the T lymphocytes or T cells. The B lymphocytes produce antibodies and oversee humoral immunity. These cells develop immunocompetence in bone marrow and provide humoral immunity. B lymphocytes can target specific extracellular antigens. The T lymphocytes or T cells constitute the cell-mediated arm of the adaptive defenses and do not make antibodies. T lymphocytes can recognize and eliminate specific virus-infected or tumor cells. These cells develop immunocompetence in the thymus and oversee cell-mediated immunity. In contrast, antigen-presenting cells do not respond to specific antigens, but instead play an essential role in activating the lymphocytes that do. The immune system's ability to respond to such threats depends on the ability of its cells to recognize foreign substances in the body by binding to them and to communicate with one another so that the system as a whole mounts a response specific to those antigens. Now let's proceed to humoral antibody-mediated immune response. An immunocompetent but as yet immature B lymphocyte is stimulated to complete its development from naive to fully mature B cell when antigens bind to its surface receptors. This binding event sensitizes or activates the lymphocyte to switch on and undergo clonal selection. Clonal selection of B cells occurs when antigens bind to the receptors, causing them to proliferate. Most clone members become plasma cells, which secrete antibodies. This is called the primary humoral response. In this process, the lymphocyte begins to grow and then multiplies rapidly to form an army of cells exactly like itself and bearing the same antigen-specific receptor. Other clone members become memory B cells, capable of mounting a rapid attack against the same antigen in subsequent meetings, or secondary humoral responses. These cells provide immunological memory. Active humoral immunity is acquired during an infection or via vaccination and provides immunological memory. Passive immunity is conferred when a donor's antibodies are injected into the bloodstream or when the mother's antibodies cross the placenta. It does not provide immunological memory. Now let's talk about basic antibody structure. Antibody functions include agglutination, complement fixation, neutralization, opsonization, and precipitation. Antibodies are proteins produced by sensitized B cells or plasma cells in response to an antigen, and they are capable of binding specifically with that antigen. It is composed of 4 polypeptide chains that form a Y-shaped molecule. Each polypeptide chain has a variable and a constant region. Variable regions form antigen binding sites, one on each arm of the Y. Constant regions determine antibody function and class. There are 5 classes of antibodies that exist. IgM, IgA, IgD, IgG, and IgE. They differ structurally and functionally. Monoclonal antibodies are pure preparations of a single antibody type useful in diagnosing various infectious disorders and cancer and in treating certain cancers. Fight to defend pathogens from sneaking in our system and infect other living cells. When this pathogen manages to infect a living cell, the antibodies, also referred to as immunoglobulins, are ineffective. Because of this, the body will not recognize the pathogen within a living cell, and the antibody-mediated or humoral immune response cannot identify it. But luckily, our body got some pretty good backup systems. The cell-mediated or cellular immune response comes to play and kills the infected cells before the pathogen multiplies. The cellular immune response is one of the two types of the adaptive immune system inside the body and occurs through the release of cytokine and activation of phagocytes. It is where the T lymphocytes, or T cells for short, go after body cells that have been hijacked by intracellular pathogens like viruses or bacteria. They are activated to form a clone by binding with a recognized antigen. These antigens are presented by a macrophage or other antigen-presenting cell, and double recognition occurs. The process begins with an antigen-presenting cell, or APC, producing antigens and are displayed in its surface with one of the APC's own proteins. The activation process is involved with two types, the helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells. Helper T cells are T cells that act as the managers of the response. They release cytokines that helps activated T cells to bind to the infected cells and stimulates the production of cytotoxic T cells and B cells to help fight the invader. Cytotoxic T cells are enhanced by helper T cells and specialize in killing the virus-infected cells directly by binding tightly to it and release toxic chemicals called perforin and granzymes. Moreover, the release of cytokines attract other types of white blood cells and enhancing the ability of macrophages to engulf and destroy microorganisms. In this way, the cell-mediated immunity responds to viral infections, graft rejection, and chronic inflammation. T-cell activation and interactions with other cells of the immune response. In addition to the T-cell population are the regulatory T cells or suppressor T cells, which release chemicals that suppress the activity of both T and B cells and stops the immune response after an antigen has been successfully inactivated or destroyed. This helps prevent uncontrolled or unnecessary immune system activity. Moving forward, let's talk about organ transplants and rejection. When a person has one of their organs stopped working or failed to function properly, that it can no longer do its job, undergoing an organ transplant can be a desirable option. There are four major types of organ transplants: the autografts, isografts, allografts, and xenografts. Autografts is when a tissue is transplanted from one side to another part of the body in the same individual. Isografts is when a tissue is transplanted from a donor to a genetically identical person, for example, identical twin. Allografts are grafts taken from a non-identical donor to a recipient of the same species. It is the most commonly used graft, taken from a recently deceased person. Xenografts are grafts taken from a different species, such as heart valve from pigs into a human recipient. Xenografts of whole organs are not Factors are taken into consideration for organ transplant, such as blood type, tissue, and size of an organ. At least 75% match is needed to attempt graft. Although organs transplants are mostly successful, a transplant rejection can be a problem if an organ or tissue is mismatched. Rejection happens when a recipient's immune system attacks the transplanted organ, as the organ is seen as foreign and our body attempts to reject it. Immunosuppressive therapy is followed after the surgery. Immunosuppressant drug, corticosteroids, anti-proliferative drug, and X-ray are given to prevent the rejection of the transplanted tissue. What can go wrong with the immune system? Disorders of immunity happen when your immune system does not work correctly. It includes allergies, autoimmune diseases, and immunodeficiency. Allergies. Allergies is an immune system response to fight off a perceived threat that is typically harmless to the body. Allergen, allo, meaning altered, erg, meaning reaction, is the term used to distinguish this type of antigen. Allergies. Allergies is an immune system response to fight off a perceived threat. Its type includes immediate hypersensitivity, anaphylactic shock, and delayed hypersensitivity. Immediate hypersensitivity or acute hypersensitivity is the most common type. It is triggered by re-exposure to a specific type of allergen after sensitization stage. It involves immunoglobulin E, which releases histamine and other chemicals when it binds to mast cells. Histamine causes blood vessels to dilate, become leaky, and promote edema. It causes smooth muscle contraction, constricting passages, and restricting airflow. Antihistamine are commonly used to counteract these effects. Second, anaphylactic shock. Anaphylactic shock is fairly rare but is a potentially life-threatening allergic reaction. It can occur when an allergen directly enters the blood and circulates rapidly through the body, as might happen with bee stings and peanuts. Anaphylactic shock causes difficulty in breathing and sudden vasodilation, which may lead to circulatory collapse and even death. Epinephrine shots is required to reverse these effects. Lastly, delayed hypersensitivity. Delayed hypersensitivity is mediated by T cells. It is referred to as delayed as it takes much longer to appear. T cells or macrophages activate the release of cytokine, which can cause tissue damage. Corticosteroid drugs are used to provide relief. The most familiar example of this reaction is allergic contact dermatitis. Second immune response of disorders of immunity is autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune disease occurs when the immune system produces autoantibodies and attacks a person's healthy body tissue by mistake. Most common autoimmune diseases are the following: rheumatoid arthritis, which is a chronic inflammatory disorder wherein the immune system mistakenly destroys the joints, causing inflammation and pain. Multiple sclerosis impairs nerve cells and skeletal muscles. It is characterized by difficulty in swallowing and talking and generalized muscle weakness. Type 1 diabetes mellitus, in which the immune system attacks insulin-producing cells in pancreas. As a result, body weight decline and Graves' disease, which is one form of hypothyroidism. Immune system stimulates the thyroid gland to produce excessive amount of thyroxine. As a result, thyroid gland enlarges and the eyes may bulge. The third disorder of immunity is immunodeficiency. Immunodeficiency is a state in which the production or function of immune cells are abnormal and the immune system's ability to fight off diseases is impaired. It includes a severe combined immunodeficiency or SCID and acquired immune deficiency syndrome or AIDS. A severe combined immunodeficiency disease or SCID is life-threatening and the most devastating condition, in which the number and function of both B and T cells are severely compromised. This results to weak immune system and susceptibility to infections. SCID can be treated by bone marrow transplants or reverse isolation. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome or AIDS is caused by the human immunodeficiency virus or HIV. It can be transmitted in blood, breast milk, semen, and vaginal secretions. HIV attacks the immune system, specifically the helper T cells, weakening the adaptive immune response. There is still no cure for HIV infection. Moving on to the last topic, the developmental aspects of the lymphatic system and body defenses. If lymphatic system problems occur, they are painfully obvious. It may result to severe edema if removed or lost, but vessels can grow back in time. In the 5th week of development, lymphatic vessels form by budding of veins. Thymus and spleen are the first lymphoid organs to appear in the embryo, and the rest are poorly developed. However, soon after birth, it will become populated by lymphocytes as the immune system begins to function. Later on, these lymphocytes develop immunocompetent cells which then populate other lymphoid tissues. Although the ability of the immune system to recognize foreign antigens is genetically determined, stress appears to interfere with normal immune response. Immune system serves us throughout our lifetime, but its efficiency wanes in old age, and infections, autoimmune diseases, immunodeficiency become more susceptible. Savannah.